if the state did do that? Does that mean more resources? What does that really mean in practice?
Well, the state gets money from the government for emergencies. They also have received money for COVID. It allows flexibility of moving dollars around. For example, right now we can't legally use COVID dollars for monkeypox efforts. So it's kind of like having your hands tied behind your back, and it allows flexibility. So I think that's the first thing. And then secondly, I think it allows diversion of priorities from the state. I think it's a little bit dicey right now because we have another pandemic, which is COVID, happening at the same time. So when you think about diversion of resources, it can get a little bit political. So I think that might be some of what's going on right now.
All right, well, we'll see if maybe they make that call in the coming days. I know a lot of people are hoping for that. We're now hearing that Spain and Brazil are reporting the first deaths from monkeypox outside of Africa. That sounds concerning to hear. Are you concerned, and what do you know about that?
No, I'm not concerned. It's as we see more and more cases, it will be inevitable that there may be people who won't do well, but not a lot of people. In fact, there haven't been any deaths so far in the United States. Of the thousands, more than 20,000 cases around the world, outside of West and Central Africa, it's really incredible that there have only been the Brazil cases and the Spain cases for that so far. When people die from monkeypox, they don't die of monkeypox. They die like a burn patient may not do well when your open source allows the entry of other bacteria like Staph aureus, et cetera, that can really get into the bloodstream and cause you to get septic and ill. So that's what happens. And hopefully with an infrastructure like we do in the US, there will be a much lower chance of that ever happening. But it's something that we need to be aware of. And again, another reason why we need to act now so that cases don't continue to rise.
Right. So we're also hearing at the same time then about more cases of monkeypox in children, and we are hearing about that here in the U.S. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the kids so far in the U.S. Have gotten infected because they were household contacts in the household where there was an active patient. So for the general pediatric population, I'm still not worried. I am hoping that it will be easier to give kids the currently available vaccine, Jynneos, easier, because right now it's possible, but it requires more paperwork. So I'm hoping there's a lower barrier for that. Around the world, there have been, a few dozen cases of kids infected as well, also in a very similar situation of household contacts. But again, not a lot of kids so far. And, I'm hoping that it remains that way.
Right, because kids are going back to school. I think the Oakland School District goes back next week. And so parents might be concerned. We know how kids touch everything and can spread disease, things like that easily. So there's that concern. Do you think it does spread more rapidly among children?
So far, all the data of disease that might be more serious in kids comes from another strain of monkeypox virus, which is not the strain currently circulating. The strain currently circulating is not that as serious as there's another variety that's more common in Central Africa, and that's really where kids can have problems. But in this one, in terms of transmission right now, don't think of it as being a big problem in the general kid population, although always on guard, like during COVID. And, in terms of transmission within the school area, not very high probability. Again, most of the kids, even not just in the US, around the world, have been in households. So I think, there are two ways to deal with kids. If they've been exposed, you give them the vaccine. You have a long period of time because the incubation period is so long with monkeypox. 4 days, the kid wouldn't get anything. Within 2 weeks, lower the chance of getting seriously ill. Even if the kid gets disease, and from the reports of the two kids so far in the US, they have very, very mild disease. There is that T-pox available that can be given to kids.
I'm getting a question here from Damien, who's saying on Facebook, will the monkeypox outbreak turn into a major outbreak? And I know a lot of people are just saying if we can get a hold of it now, we can get people the vaccine. It won't. Why is there such a shortage of this vaccine right now?
There's a shortage because it's the perfect storm. I mean, there's only one factory that makes it in the world, as opposed to multiple for COVID vaccines. That factory, before the monkeypox outbreak, had planned to do some renovations. So that's another thing. And then the third barrier was the FDA inspection of the facilities, which in FDA timeline seems to be warp speed. But I think in terms of outbreak and human anxiety timeline, taking a month to inspect a facility in Denmark before releasing the additional 700,000 plus vaccines was probably a little bit, we wished it could have been a little bit faster. So those are all the reasons why I think all this came true, that we only have and still continue to have a trickle of vaccines available. The other thing that happened very soon after is, of course, prioritizing first vaccines. No, they started doing that in the UK. They did that for COVID vaccines too. Then New York, and then San Francisco and California followed through. And now many places around the country are doing that. I think you just want to do many people with the first shot as fast as possible to try and cut that chain of transmission.
Right. So should people be canceling plans, activities, travel? We saw just yesterday there was the LGBTQ event that happens every year, and that still went on as planned despite these concerns. Should some of these events be canceled?
I don't think events should be canceled at all. The risk to the general public in a event like Outside Lines is still very low in the big scheme of things. Not zero, but low. And I think what people need to do is just to be aware and weigh risks and benefits. So a very low chance, close to zero, might still be something that might be important to somebody who may decide not to go, but to somebody else, it may be okay in a general setting. And there are ways to even lower risk even further when you go. If you wear long sleeves or things like that, or don't have a lot of skin to skin contact with someone. Again, if there's no active weeping lesion, it's going to be very, very low likelihood of a quick transmission. It's only when there's an open sore and a break in the skin. And that's why intimate contact is so efficient at transmissions, because you make the break in the skin by microabrasions, by, the more you're with someone in an intimate setting. But in an outside lands, you're giving somebody a high five or hugging them, you're more likely to get COVID than monkeypox.
Right. Oh, gosh. No, we didn't even get to COVID-19. So much to talk about. Dr. Peter Chin-Hung, thank you as always for joining us and breaking all of this down.
Thanks so much, Liz.
Thanks. We'll see you soon. All right, coming up, we're going to dive into politics with a look at Speaker Nancy Pelosi's expected visit to Taiwan and why it's causing some controversy. ABC News Political Director Rick Klein is going to join us next on Getting Answers. Stick with us. Welcome back. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is making some headlines today. She's expected to visit Taiwan as part of her tour of Asia, despite warnings from China to do so. China has warned that its military would never sit idly by if Pelosi were to visit Taiwan, the self-ruled island claimed by Beijing. So joining us live now to talk about that and the significance of this trip is ABC News Political Director Rick Klein. Rick, good to see you. But before we get to this, I do want to ask you about some breaking news we're getting from the White House that President Biden is going to address the nation in just over an hour from now to talk about a successful counterterrorism operation. What are you guys learning about this?
Yeah, ABC News is reporting that the longtime lieutenant to Osama bin Laden, the heir to his empire in Al Qaeda, al-Zawahiri, is going to be the person that's announced as having been taken out by U.S. counterterrorism forces over the weekend. A drone operation is our understanding in a residential neighborhood. We're going to hear more from the president, but it's a big victory for the efforts to root out terrorism, a big victory for President Biden to announce at a difficult time in his presidency.
Absolutely. It certainly is. All right, Rick, we'll look forward to that. I know ABC News will have a special report with the president's remarks when that happens. Back to Nancy Pelosi, though. There's been speculation for quite a few days now over whether she's going to make this trip to Taiwan. Will she, won't she? We're now learning it's likely she will indeed visit the island. Why is this trip so significant?
Well, this has long been an area of contention in American foreign policy. A lot of American presidents have danced around the issues raised by Taiwan and this relationship with China. This is something that's being applauded by a lot of people in the human rights community. The Biden administration has been very skeptical of this because they've been hesitant to recognize any claims on Taiwan's sovereignty. The Chinese view this as a provocative move, to say the least. And there hasn't been any U.S. leader of her stature in about a quarter century now, since Newt Gingrich as House Speaker made a roughly similar trip. So this is something that has always left U.S. diplomats on eggshells. Clearly, though, Speaker Pelosi feels like this is an important statement to make on behalf of human rights and the people of Taiwan in their own right. It's going to be, I think, seen as a victory for Taiwan and a blow to the Chinese, and something, as you mentioned, that they're not going to sit down for.
Yeah. So what has been the response from China so far? What are we seeing?
Well, they're not happy about it, and they were also watching very carefully how the American administration is handling this, because it's been clear through the public signals here that the Biden White House is not a fan of this. The Department of State has been clear that they didn't want this visit to happen, and it's an interesting moment for Speaker Pelosi to step out on her own, in her own constitutional authority, and make this an important statement. There's been a bipartisan clamoring for more recognition for Taiwan and in its efforts against China, and not to cater to the Chinese edicts, the prohibitions that they put out. And I think Speaker Pelosi is likely to cast it as a statement about human rights, even though as Speaker of the House, she can visit anywhere she wants. It is very unusual to have a Speaker of the House of the same party as the current president make a trip like this in contravention of the stated wishes of the current administration.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question to you. It's like, what is she hoping to get out of this? Because it certainly is controversial. Here in San Francisco, there's been some protests outside of her office today.
Yeah, look, I think Speaker Pelosi knows that, knows her district and knows the community well, and knows that there's been a clamoring for more action on this. And there's probably nothing that she could do as House Speaker to elevate the issue quite like this. Taking time during a very packed, very busy foreign trip into Asia to make a visit like this. Clearly, it was done deliberately with a lot of planning, a lot of advance notice. The White House had been claiming they didn't know about this specifically. There's nothing they can do specifically to stop her either, but they were trying to discourage this. So it'd be interesting to see any pieces of the fallout.
Absolutely. All right, we'll see what happens and if she really ends up going tomorrow. So let's talk about some other politics now, Rick. We're, 100 days away from the midterms now, so the countdown's on. What are you anticipating nationally? How hard do you think it's going to be for Democrats to keep control of the House?
The House, I think, is a long shot, maybe even gone for the Democrats at this stage. Despite some good economic news, they can look at this district by district and maybe find a way to fight it out, but I don't see it. The Senate's another story, and then the Senate battleground looks a lot more favorable for them. Another primary tomorrow, where the Republicans will find out who their candidate is against Senator Mark Kelly in Arizona. Out of the primaries tomorrow in some 5 states. The Senate is a much different animal, and it's because it's a 50-50 Senate. It's also because Frankly, Donald Trump has gotten involved in a bunch of primaries where Republicans would rather have seen him on the sidelines. Just tonight, endorsing Eric Greitens, the disgraced former governor of Missouri, in his bid for Senate. In a bit of a surprise, it might even put Missouri back on the map as a potential win for the Democrats. So when you look at it district by district, state by state, I think Democrats feel a little bit better about their chances than they did a month ago, but I think pretty realistic still.
Yeah, and just a lot of people with inflation. I mean, the president will have some good news to announce tonight, but overall, people feel like it's seeming bleak for Biden and the Democrats right now. So what is the Biden administration's strategy in the coming months? What's their messaging like to try to turn things around?
Well, they're hopeful that getting this climate bill through and some healthcare provisions as well around prescription drugs gives them some things to trumpet, some things to celebrate, some things that they can be proud of. There's some things that their candidates can go talk about. They want to talk about what they did rather than what they didn't do. I've talked to White House aides about this, and there's a frustration around that. They feel like the Democrats have been so focused on what they haven't been able to do. They haven't given the opportunity for President Biden to give a full-on explanation of that. COVID obviously has sidelined him recently. But I think their anticipation is that he's able to get out there more, maybe more importantly, that members of Congress, Democrats are able to go out and say, look what we delivered, look what we got done, look at the contrast. One thing I've heard a lot, Liz, from Democrats is they want to make this into a choice versus a referendum. They want to say, look, it's not just us in the abstract as Democrats, it's up us or the other party. Right. I think that's a piece of where January 6th falls into it.
For sure, and Roe v. Wade as well.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. On the ballot tomorrow in Kansas as well, abortion rights.
Right. All right, Rick Klein, I could keep going with you. It's always good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Liz. Good to see you.
See you soon. All right, up next, is this the season for mega fires in California? A Bay Area climate expert is going to join us now to answer that question and give us a look at the wildfire outlook for the rest of this year. Coming up. Welcome back. California's wildfire season is here and with a vengeance. Over the weekend, the McKinney fire burning near the Oregon border became California's largest fire so far this year. It's burned nearly 56,000 acres in just a few days, eclipsing the Oak fire near Yosemite. And experts say things are only going to get worse. So joining us right now to talk about that is Dr. Patrick Brown, a climate scientist at San Jose State University. Thanks for joining us. First, let's talk about the McKinney fire that has exploded in size. Fire officials have said this one is going to burn for a while. Why is that?
Yeah, well, it ignited in one of these situations where it was extremely hot and dry, and it continues to be in a situation that's hot and dry. And that is what our research has shown is as it gets warmer, the fuels dry out. And I think everyone kind of has an intuitive understanding that drier fuels are going to mean that fires burn more readily. And so these fires are very difficult to contain, especially when they start basically creating their own weather, because they are able to suck in their own oxygen and become extremely high growth situations, which can be self-perpetuating. And so this is going to be a difficult fire to contain, much like a lot of the other fires that we've seen in recent fire seasons.
Right. I mean, each year, it just feels like the fires are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Do you see any scenario where that changes?
Well, in the long term, of course, the portion of this is driven by climate change. We need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions so that global temperatures stop rising, and that means that temperatures in California would stop rising. So greenhouse gas emissions eventually need to come down to zero, so that you just have temperatures steady. Not the temperatures don't go back to where they were; they stop rising. So that's the long-term climate portion of this. But the other big contributor to the increase in wildfire activity has been the fire suppression over the past century, which has allowed fuels to build up in our forests to very unnatural levels. And so we have the situation of warming and drying on top of way more fuels than would be there naturally, because they typically would be burned out by higher frequency, lower intensity fires. And so we need to deal with that excess fuel that's in our forests right now. And so that either means prescribed burns during times of the year when the fire won't get out of control, or mechanical thinning, literally going in and taking fuels and material out, so that when a fire does reach that area, there's less to burn.
Right. So currently, as we all know, if you've been following, clearly living here in California, we're in a mega drought. What does that mean in terms of the impact that has on fire and its ability to spread?
Yeah, so the mega drought, basically, if you look over the past 20 years, it's been about as dry as we think any 20-year period has been over the past 1,000 years. And a lot of people, when they think about drought, they just think about the precipitation component of that, and we call that meteorological drought. But from a forest fire perspective, what you really care about is how much moisture is available to vegetation and how much moisture would be in the fuels for fires. And when you think about that, you not only consider the precipitation, which is the water that's going in, but the evaporation, what's coming out. And what we see with climate change is that as it gets warmer, that essentially means that the atmosphere can hold more water vapor. And so it's able to pull water out of fuels easier. And so we haven't necessarily seen a huge decrease in precipitation over that 20-year period. It's more that we have more evaporation out, which is causing the entire West and California to be drier than it would be otherwise. And we think that it's about 30 to 40% worse due to human-caused climate change than it would have been otherwise. But that's good news in some way, because it means that 60 to 70% is natural, and so we would expect that to kind of go back to a typical state at some point, even though we're this 20-year drought period continues to be as bad as it has been over the past couple of decades.
Right. Is there a way to predict how bad a fire season might be? I mean, do you have a sense of what the rest of this year might look like?
Yeah, there's statistical relationships between how warm and dry it is in the winter and spring, and then how bad the fire season is in the summer and fall. And so we don't have any reason to expect this season to be a lot better than it has been recently, because it has been still relatively warm and dry in California. So there's a lot of natural variability for any given fire season, and so there's kind of randomness in terms of when the fire season ends, because a lot of that has to do with if you get lucky and you get a big rain event, say in October, which can then cause all of your fuels to have a lot of moisture in them and make it a lot less likely to have major fires. But that's really difficult to predict in advance. So when we look at kind of our models that look at the seasonal level forecasting, the monthly level, we don't see any reason to believe that it's going to be more wet or dry than usual. So there's not really like a strong signal there yet.
For sure. Well, Dr. Patrick Brown, thank you so much for joining us. I know we're coming into some of the toughest months yet. We appreciate your time. Thank you. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Sure. Yeah.